Mia hadn't spoken a word since the accident. Not one. Not when her leg was stitched up. Not when her mother's seat went empty at dinner. Not even when her dad tucked her in every night whispering, "It's okay, baby. You're safe now." Doctors called it selective mutism, trauma so deep her voice had just shut down. At 10 years old, her world became silence, color, and brushes. She spoke in drawings now. Her notebooks were filled with birds, stars, and pages soaked in emotion. Her dad, James, a decorated detective with a chest full of medals, had seen the worst humanity could offer, but none of it compared to watching his daughter vanish inside herself. That's why he'd transferred them to Pinewood Estates. Fresh start, quiet streets, a backyard with sunlight and space. "What do you think of your new room?" he asked, placing a box of paints on her desk. Mia gave a thumbs up and pointed to the backyard. "Plenty of space for your easel out there," he smiled. James didn't know their new neighborhood came with a president, Mrs. Blackwood, a woman who treated HOA rules like commandments etched in stone. Her clipped grey hair and sharper voice kept lawns trimmed and neighbors tense. She noticed everything, and soon she'd notice Mia. But for now, Mia found peace on the wooden fence that bordered the walking path. She painted a mural, birds flying free, trees stretching upward, hidden flowers her mum once loved. Neighbors smiled. Some even left notes. For the first time in 2 years, something in Mia glowed again, and then, one morning, a bright orange paper flapped on their door. Unauthorized property modification. Remove within 48 hours. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This one's gonna hurt. James didn't wait. He marched straight to the HOA office with a folder of letters from Mia's therapist. Proof that this mural wasn't decoration. It was therapy, medicine for a voice still buried in grief. "This is a medical necessity," he told Mrs. Blackwood across her spotless desk. "Not vandalism." She didn't blink, just adjusted her pearl necklace and said, "Rules don't make room for exceptions, detective. Property values affect everyone. Your daughter's issues are not the community's concern." James leaned forward. "She's communicating through that mural. It's her only way." Mrs. Blackwood cut him off cold. "The fence must be restored to its original condition. This neighborhood has standards." 3 days later, James got an emergency call on hostage situation across town. "I'll be back soon," he told Mia, kissing her forehead as she added bluebirds to the sky. She smiled faintly, focused. He left. Less than an hour later, Mrs. Blackwood arrived with 2 workers and paint buckets. Clipboard in hand, jaw tight, she pointed to the part of the mural with Mia's mother. "Start with that section," she ordered. Mia dropped her brush and ran. She placed herself between the men and the painting, shaking her head, arms stretched wide. "Her hands," said everything. "Please, don't." "Move aside, young lady," Mrs. Blackwood snapped. But Mia didn't budge. Tears streamed down her face. She couldn't speak, but her whole body was screaming. Mrs. Blackwood's lips curled. She grabbed a metal pipe one worker had used to pry open a paint can. I said, "Move!" Across the street, 16-year-old Ethan was filming for a school project documenting HOA conflicts. He captured what happened next in full detail. Mrs. Blackwood swung the pipe, and Mia's legs broke with a sickening crack. Ethan froze, phone still recording, breath caught in his throat. Across the street, Mia collapsed in silence, mouth open, in a scream no one could hear. The workers stood motionless, horrified. Mrs. Blackwood didn't move, didn't apologize. She just turned to the men and said, "Clean this mess up before someone important sees it." Ethan called 911, voice shaking as he described what he'd just seen. "A woman She hit a little girl. She's not moving. Her legs. Something's wrong." He kept the camera trained on Mia, capturing every second. At the hospital, James paced the hallway, badge still clipped to his belt, hands clenching and unclenching as nurses passed by. His partner, Detective Ramirez, showed up with updates and coffee, but James barely registered the words. Finally, a doctor stepped forward. "Detective Reynolds, I'm Dr. Lin. We've completed the initial assessment of your daughter's injuries." "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice tight. "Both leg bones are fractured. The right leg's broken in 2 places. We'll need to operate to insert plates and pins. I'm also concerned about nerve damage." She paused. "With extensive therapy, she may walk again, but there could be permanent limitations." James swallowed hard. Will she be okay?" "She's strong," Dr. Lin said. "But she hasn't responded to anyone, not even with gestures. She hasn't tried to communicate at all." "There's something else," she added, her tone shifting. "The woman who brought her in, Mrs. Blackwood, she's already told hospital staff that Mia attacked her, that she acted in self-defense." James blinked. "She what?" "I treated your daughter's injuries myself," Dr. Lin said, her voice firm. "Her story doesn't match the damage I saw." From the nurse's station, a voice rang out. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge." It was Mrs. Blackwood. James took one step toward her, jaw clenched, eyes locked. But Dr. Lin grabbed his arm. "Detective, Mia needs you calm right now. She's preparing for surgery." He stopped. "Not for Mrs. Blackwood's sake, but for Mia's." He turned and walked toward his daughter's room, past the woman who had shattered his little girl and dared to call it self-defense. Mia lay still, her legs wrapped and elevated. Her eyes met his for just a second, then drifted away. She didn't even reach for his hand, just closed her eyes, retreating deeper into the quiet place where no one could hurt her anymore. By morning, the waiting room was filled with familiar faces. Officers from James's precinct. Detective Ramirez handed him a report. The responding officers filed this as aggravated assault with a deadly weapon against a minor. James exhaled. "Good. There's more," Ramirez added quietly. "Councilman Blackwood's been calling the chief since dawn. He's trying to keep this administrative. No charges. Private settlement." James shook his head. "She broke my daughter's legs. There's no administrative about that. They're offering full medical coverage, therapy, money for pain and suffering, but in exchange, you drop charges, sign an NDA." James looked past Ramirez to the hospital window, where Councilman Blackwood stood in a tailored suit. Beside him, Margaret Blackwood, calm, emotionless. A hospital administrator approached with a folder. "Detective Reynolds, we have paperwork for Mia's care, and the Blackwoods have requested a meeting." "I'm not leaving my daughter, of course, but your insurance has a very high deductible. The Blackwoods are offering to cover everything." James thought of his dwindling savings, the surgeries, the equipment Mia might need just to stand again. "I'll consider it," he said. But inside he already knew there'd be no peace without justice. 3 days later, James wheeled Mia out of the hospital. She hadn't spoken, hadn't drawn, hadn't even gestured since the attack. Her silence now felt different, heavier. Not just trauma, but defeat. At home, the mural was gone. Beige paint now covered every inch, matching every other fence in the neighborhood. Mia didn't cry, she didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes as James lifted her into the house. That night, he opened his laptop. The settlement offer from the Blackwoods waited in his inbox: full medical coverage, therapy funding, a generous payout. All of it if he signed a non-disclosure and dropped all charges. His phone buzzed. Ramirez. "Chief wants to see you tomorrow. Blackwood's putting pressure on everyone. Be careful." As he stared at the screen, there was a knock at the front door. A tall teen stood on the porch, eyes wide with nerves. "Detective Reynolds, I'm Ethan. I live across the street." "It's late, son. I know, sir. But this couldn't wait." He held up a flash drive. "I recorded what happened. I have the whole thing on video." James blinked. "You? What?" "I've been filming Mrs. Blackwood for a school project. HOA violations and stuff. I caught everything. Her swinging the pipe. Mia falling." James took the drive like it was made of gold. "You haven't shown it to anyone?" Ethan shook his head. "But my mum got a call. They're threatening to expel me for invasion of privacy if I share it. Mrs. Blackwood's on the school board." James's voice dropped. "You still came here." Ethan's shoulders lifted. What happened to Mia wasn't right. That was the moment James saw it. The domino, the crack in the wall. And he realized he wasn't alone anymore. "Is she going to be okay?" Ethan asked quietly, peering past James into the dim hallway. James sighed. "Physically, maybe. Emotionally? I don't know. She hasn't tried to communicate at all since it happened." Ethan's voice cracked. "She used to wave at me when I'd ride my bike. Her art, it was amazing." He hesitated. "My little sister has autism. We moved here last year, and Mrs. Blackwood's filed 3 complaints about the sensory equipment in our yard. My mum's thinking of moving again." James narrowed his eyes. This isn't the first time she's gone after a family with special needs. Ethan shook his head. "Not even close. There was a boy with Down syndrome. She led a campaign to ban his therapy ramp. And a girl with allergies, her mum tried to ban certain plants near the playground. They left too." James's detective instincts kicked in. "Do your parents know how to reach those families?" Ethan nodded. "My mum runs a support group. She's been keeping track of what Mrs. Blackwood's done." Later that night, James watched the video. It was crystal clear. Mia protecting her mural. Mrs. Blackwood yelling, grabbing the pipe, the swing, the sound, Mia collapsing. And then, cold as stone, Mrs. Blackwood beginning her cover story. James stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then he opened the email with the settlement offer and tore it straight down the middle. The next few days moved fast. Interviews with the DA, statements from families Mrs. Blackwood had harassed, medical documentation from Mia's doctors, councilmen. Blackwood retaliated immediately. James was suddenly under investigation. Anonymous complaints filled his personnel file. His bank called about an audit. But through it all, Mia stayed silent. Not just with words, but with everything. Her world had gone still. And that James couldn't fix alone. The HOA meeting was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind James usually avoided like the plague. But that afternoon, after a grueling round of physical therapy, he tucked Mia into bed and kissed her forehead. She surprised him, reached for the tablet she hadn't touched in weeks. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Meeting tonight?" He blinked. "Yes, but we don't need to go. You're exhausted." She typed again. "Want to?" James crouched beside her, brushing hair from her face. "Sweetheart, you need rest. Those people, they've been awful." Her fingers hovered. Then, "My voice." Those 2 words hit like thunder. For 2 years he'd prayed to hear her again, And now, after everything, here she was, fighting to speak. "You're sure?" Mia nodded, firm, clear. The community centre buzzed with tension, residents whispering, glancing toward the front table where Mrs. Blackwood stood with her ever-present clipboard, Councilman Blackwood at her side. Despite pending charges, she hadn't stepped down. "Before we begin," she announced, "I'd like to address the unfortunate rumours surrounding recent events. As your HOA president, I've always prioritized community standards and property values." James rolled Mia's wheelchair into the back of the room. "Tonight," Mrs. Blackwood continued, "I'm proposing amendments to ensure this never happens again. Stricter decor rules, mandatory approvals, and processes to handle violators." James pushed Mia's chair forward. "Standards?" he said aloud. "Is that what you call it? Assaulting a child?" Heads turned. A hush fell. "This meeting is for constructive discussion," Councilman Blackwood snapped. James didn't stop. "My daughter was painting, communicating, and your wife destroyed the only way she knew how." Mrs. Blackwood's voice was icy. "Your daughter has behavioral issues. She was aggressive." From her seat, Mia raised her hand, and the entire room held its breath. Mia's hand trembled as she lowered it to her lap. For a second, James feared she'd changed her mind. That fear had swallowed her whole again. Then, barely above a whisper, came the sound he'd been aching to hear. "You hurt me." The room went silent. "You broke my legs," Mia said louder now, her voice raw but steady. "You called me names. You painted over my mum." James's throat clenched. Tears slipped down his face. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't silent. She was speaking, and the words were louder than any scream. Mrs. Blackwood's face twitched. "This is clearly rehearsed. I have something everyone should see." Ethan stood, holding his laptop. Mrs. Blackwood stiffened. "You do not have permission to—" "Actually," Ethan interrupted calmly, "HOA bylaws say any resident can present relevant material with notice. I submitted mine last week." He plugged in his laptop. The projector flickered, and there it was. The mural. Mia's birds. The flowers for her mum. Her colours. Then Mrs. Blackwood, storming in with the workers. The confrontation. The metal pipe. The swing. Gasps echoed through the room. A woman near the back began to sob. On screen, Mrs. Blackwood stood over Mia's crumpled form, saying, "See what happens when you don't follow the rules?" Then, even colder, "Now clean this mess up before someone important sees it." The video ended. No one spoke. Until I couldn't talk after my mom died, Mia said, her voice soft but clear. The pictures were my words. She looked straight at Mrs. Blackwood. "You tried to take my words away again." Mrs. Blackwood grabbed her purse and stood, her husband shielding her, but 2 officers stepped forward. "Margaret Blackwood, you're under arrest for aggravated assault against a minor." And the room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Mrs. Blackwood didn't say a word as they cuffed her. She didn't beg, didn't fight, just stared straight ahead, lips pressed into a tight, furious line. Her husband tried to speak up, but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They were focused on Mia, on the little girl who had found her voice when it mattered most. In the weeks that followed, Pinewood Estates changed, not just in policy, in spirit. The new HOA board approved plans to turn an unused lot into something completely different, a community art space. They named it Mia's Voice. Residents came together to paint, plant, and build. Wide ramps for wheelchairs, shaded benches for parents, and shelves full of donated paints and brushes. James showed Mia the sign bearing her name, and for the first time since the mural, she smiled. Really smiled. Her recovery wasn't fast. Her legs would never be the same. She went from a wheelchair to a walker, then to braces that strapped tight around her calves. But she moved. And more importantly, she spoke. First to James, then to her therapists, then one afternoon to a little boy, painting in silence just like she used to. "Doesn't have to be perfect," she told him gently. "It just has to be yours." That's when she started teaching art classes at the community space. Kids with autism, trauma, disabilities, kids who had stopped talking or never started. She knew how to reach them not through therapy, but through creation, because she'd lived it. "It's not about painting pretty things," she told a reporter at the grand opening. "It's about saying something when you don't have the words." And that, everyone agreed, was what made Mia's voice the heart of the neighborhood. 1 year later, James sat on a weathered bench beneath the shade trees at Mia's voice, watching his daughter lead a group of kids through their latest mural. Her braces clicked faintly as she walked, uneven but confident. Her laughter echoed over the grass, clear, light, real. The mural was nearly done. A skyline of colorful houses stood side by side. In front of them, children of every size and shape reached toward a wide sky. Birds flew from their hands, just like Mia's used to. She knelt beside a boy who was hesitant to join. "Doesn't matter if you mess up," she whispered. "The colors always know what to do." The boy dipped his brush in blue and smiled. James blinked back tears. She had come so far. Later, she limped over to where he sat, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you think Mum would have liked it?" He nodded, voice thick. "She'd have loved it, almost as much as hearing your voice again." Mia smiled, lifting her brush. She added a final touch to the mural, a heart, small and red, tucked into the branches of a painted tree. Then she stood beside him, paint on her fingers, sunlight on her face. "Some stories don't have words," she said softly, "but they still need to be told." And in that moment, surrounded by children who no longer needed to stay silent, by neighbors who had learned to listen, and by a father who had never stopped believing, Mia's silence didn't seem like a loss anymore. It felt like something she had carried through the fire and turned into light. So if you're watching this somewhere quiet, maybe from a place you're still healing in, take a breath and remember, even the quietest voices can change everything.